The autumn of 1996 brought an early chill to Cedar Brook, Michigan, a small industrial town nestled between the shores of Lake Huron and endless forests of maple and pine. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where children rode bicycles without helmets and parents didn't lock their doors until bedtime. The Williams family had called Cedar Brook home for over a decade, living in a modest two-story colonial house on Elm Street that David Williams had inherited from his grandmother. 9-year-old Jessica Williams was an imaginative child with auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight and hazel eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She was the kind of girl who talked to trees, who saw faces in clouds, and who could spend hours creating elaborate stories with her collection of dolls and action figures. Her teachers at Cedar Brook Elementary described her as bright but introverted, a dreamer who often seemed to be listening to conversations that no one else could hear. The Williams family basement had become Jessica's favorite retreat during the cooler months. Unlike the damp, cluttered cellars common in older homes, theirs had been finished by David's grandmother in the 1970s, complete with wood paneling, carpeting, and fluorescent lighting. It served as a family room of sorts, housing an old television, a collection of board games, and boxes of books that had accumulated over generations. David Williams worked as a supervisor at the local paper mill, a steady job that had supported his family for 15 years. He was a quiet man in his early 40s, methodical and reliable, the type of person who mowed his lawn every Saturday and maintained his tools with obsessive care. Linda Williams taught 3rd grade at the elementary school, beloved by students and parents alike for her patience and creativity. At 38, she had the kind of nurturing spirit that made children confide their secrets and parents seek her advice. On October 12, 1996, Linda had stayed late at school for parent-teacher conferences, leaving Jessica in David's care for the afternoon. David was working on household repairs, fixing a leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom while Jessica played in the basement. It was a routine they had followed countless times before, Jessica entertaining herself downstairs while David worked on various projects throughout the house. The basement had always been considered the safest place in the house for Jessica to play unsupervised. There was only one entrance, through the kitchen, and no windows large enough for a child to escape through. The small windows near the ceiling were painted shut and blocked by David's workbench. Jessica could play there for hours, creating elaborate scenarios with her toys while remaining safely contained within the house. That afternoon, Jessica had taken her favorite doll, a blonde baby doll named Susie, and her portable cassette player downstairs to the basement. She often recorded herself telling stories or singing songs, then played them back to critique her performances like a professional entertainer. The cassette player had been a birthday gift from her aunt, a bright pink device that Jessica treasured above almost all her other possessions. David remembers checking on Jessica around 3:30, calling down the basement stairs to ask if she wanted a snack. Her cheerful response of, "Not right now, Daddy. I'm busy making a story," was the last time he heard his daughter's voice. At 4:15, David called down the stairs again, this time to tell Jessica that her mother would be home soon, and it was time to start thinking about dinner. When he received no response, he assumed she was absorbed in her play and couldn't hear him over whatever imaginative scenario she was creating. But when he called a 3rd time at 4:30 and still received no answer, a cold feeling of unease began to settle in his stomach. David set down his tools and walked to the top of the basement stairs, listening carefully for sounds of play. The house was completely silent. "Jessica?" he called more loudly. "Jessie, can you hear me?" The silence that greeted his calls was profound and unsettling. David descended the stairs quickly, his footsteps echoing in the paneled space. What he found at the bottom defied all logical explanation. The basement was empty. Jessica's doll lay abandoned on the carpeted floor, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Her cassette player sat on the old coffee table, still running, the tape wheels slowly turning, although no sound emerged from the speakers. But Jessica herself had simply vanished. David searched the basement frantically, checking behind the old couch, looking in the storage closets, even examining the ceiling tiles to see if Jessica could somehow have climbed up into the space above. But the basement contained no hiding places large enough to conceal a 9-year-old girl. And more importantly, there was no way out, except through the stairs he had just descended. The basement windows were still painted shut, their latches corroded with years of humidity. David tested each one personally, confirming that none could be opened from the inside. The walls were solid wood paneling over concrete block, with no hidden passages or secret doors. The floor was carpeted wall to wall, with no trapdoors or access points to crawl spaces below. Jessica Williams had vanished from a locked room, as completely and inexplicably as if she had never existed at all. David's frantic shouts brought neighbors running before Linda even arrived home from school. By the time she pulled into their driveway at 5:45, the house was already filled with concerned friends and neighbors helping to search every possible hiding place. Linda's face went white with terror when David explained what had happened, and she immediately took charge of the search effort with the fierce determination that only a mother could muster. The Cedar Brook Police Department, consisting of Chief Robert McKenna and 3 full-time officers, responded within minutes of David's 911 call. Chief McKenna was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement who had handled his share of missing children cases, but usually they involved runaways or custody disputes. A child vanishing from inside a locked house was entirely outside his experience. Officer Sarah Chen, the department's newest hire and only female officer, took detailed statements from both parents while Chief McKenna and Officer Martinez conducted a systematic search of the house. Every room was examined, every closet opened, every possible hiding place investigated. The search revealed nothing except the impossible fact that Jessica Williams was no longer in the house. The basement received particular attention. Crime scene tape was used to preserve the area where Jessica had last been seen, and every inch of the space was photographed and documented. The cassette player was still running when police arrived, though the tape had reached its end and was merely spinning silently. Detective Lieutenant Ray Morrison from the state police arrived at 8:30 that evening, bringing with him specialized equipment and 2 decades of experience investigating major crimes. Morrison was a methodical investigator who approached every case with scientific rigor, but even he was baffled by the circumstances of Jessica's disappearance. "Walk me through exactly what happened," Morrison requested, standing at the top of the basement stairs with David. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. David recounted the afternoon's events with painful precision. He had been working upstairs for approximately 45 minutes after last seeing Jessica. The kitchen, which contained the only entrance to the basement, had been within his line of sight for most of that time. No one had entered or left the house during the relevant period. "Is there any possibility that Jessica left the basement and went outside while you were focused on your repair work?" Morrison asked. "No," David replied firmly. "I would have seen her, and she knows she's not allowed outside when Linda isn't home. Jessica is very good about following rules." Morrison examined the basement thoroughly, paying particular attention to the windows and any structural features that might provide alternate exit routes. His investigation confirmed David's assessment. The basement was essentially a sealed box with only one entrance. The windows were too small and too high for a child to reach, even with assistance. The cassette player was taken as evidence, though it yielded few clues. The tape inside contained recordings of Jessica singing children's songs and telling rambling stories to her doll. The final recording, made shortly before her disappearance, captured Jessica's voice saying, "Okay, Susie, now we're going to play the quiet game. You have to be very, very quiet and listen carefully." After those words, the tape contained only silence until it reached its end. FBI agents arrived from the Detroit field office on October 14th, bringing federal resources to bear on what was now being treated as a potential kidnapping case. Special Agent Patricia Vance, who specialized in crimes against children, established a command center in Cedar Brook's town hall and coordinated a massive search effort. The investigation was exhaustive and sophisticated. Trained search dogs were brought to the house, allowing them to establish Jessica's scent in the basement before attempting to track her movements. The dogs followed Jessica's scent to the basement stairs, where it stopped abruptly. They could find no trace of the scent anywhere else in the house or on the property. "It's like she just vanished into thin air," the dog handler confided to Agent Vance. "I've never seen anything like it. Usually dogs can track a scent for hours, even days after someone has passed through an area. But here, the trail just ends." Forensic specialists examined every surface in the basement for fingerprints, hair fibers, or any other physical evidence that might indicate how Jessica had left the room. They found only evidence of the Williams family's normal use of the space. Jessica's fingerprints on her toys, David's on his tools, Linda's on various household items stored in the basement. The investigation expanded to include extensive background checks on the Williams family, interviews with every person who had contact with Jessica in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, and a thorough examination of the family's finances and personal relationships. Every registered individual in the state with a history of crimes against children was questioned and their alibis verified. Nothing suspicious emerged from any of these investigations. The Williams family appeared to be exactly what they seemed: a loving, stable family with no hidden problems or dangerous associations. David and Linda passed polygraph tests. Their financial records showed no signs of stress or unusual activity, and their reputations in the community were beyond reproach. Jessica's school records revealed a bright, well-adjusted child with no behavioral problems or signs of abuse. Her friends described her as imaginative and kind, though somewhat shy around adults she didn't know well. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noted that Jessica had been excited about Halloween and looking forward to trick-or-treating with her best friend Amy. The case attracted national media attention when it was featured on several television programs dedicated to missing children. The mysterious circumstances of Jessica's disappearance captured public imagination, generating hundreds of tips from across the country. Each lead was investigated thoroughly, but none provided credible information about Jessica's whereabouts. One tip seemed promising initially. A gas station attendant in Ohio claimed to have seen a man with a young girl matching Jessica's description on October 13th. But security camera footage from the station showed that the girl was African American and clearly not Jessica Williams. Another caller insisted that Jessica had been taken by aliens, pointing to the impossible nature of her disappearance as evidence of extraterrestrial involvement. While Agent Vance didn't dismiss any possibility entirely, she focused her investigation on more conventional explanations. As weeks turned to months, the intensive search efforts gradually scaled back. The FBI maintained the case as an active investigation, but the daily command center operations ceased, and the media attention began to fade. Jessica Williams joined the growing list of children who had seemingly vanished without explanation. The impact on David and Linda was catastrophic. Linda took an extended leave of absence from teaching, unable to face the concerned looks of colleagues and the innocent questions of students who remembered Jessica from school events. She spent her days cleaning the house obsessively, as if maintaining perfect order might somehow bring her daughter back. David continued working at the paper mill, but his performance suffered as his concentration was consumed by thoughts of Jessica. He began staying late at work to avoid coming home to the silent house, especially the basement where his daughter had last been seen. They tried counseling, both individually and as a couple, but talking about their loss only seemed to make the pain more acute. How do you grieve for a child who might still be alive somewhere? How do you move forward when every possibility feels like abandonment? The basement became off limits by unspoken agreement. Neither David nor Linda could bear to spend time in the space where Jessica had vanished. They sealed the door with a deadbolt and tried to pretend that part of their house no longer existed. Their marriage, strong before Jessica's disappearance, began to show signs of strain under the enormous pressure. They couldn't comfort each other because they were both drowning in their own grief and guilt. David blamed himself for not checking on Jessica sooner. Linda tortured herself with what-if scenarios. What if she hadn't stayed late for conferences? What if Jessica had been upstairs where they could see her? What if they had never let her play alone in the basement? By the first anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, David and Linda were living like polite strangers, going through the motions of daily life while avoiding any conversation that might lead back to their missing daughter. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with Jessica's belongings but empty of her presence. They kept Jessica's room exactly as she had left it, changing the sheets regularly and dusting her toys as if she might return at any moment. Linda would sometimes sit in the room for hours reading aloud from Jessica's favorite books or talking to the empty space as if her daughter could hear her. The second anniversary was even more difficult. Jessica would have been 11 years old, entering 6th grade, developing interests in boys and makeup and all the complicated social dynamics of pre-adolescence. David and Linda tried to imagine what she would look like now, how her personality might have changed, what dreams and fears she might have developed. Detective Morrison, though officially reassigned to other cases, continued to pursue leads on Jessica's disappearance during his own time. He had never encountered a case that defied explanation quite like this one. The complete absence of physical evidence, the impossible circumstances of the vanishing, the devastating impact on a loving family, it all combined to create a mystery that haunted his professional conscience. Morrison developed several theories over the years. Perhaps there was a hidden entrance to the basement that had been overlooked during the investigation. Perhaps Jessica had been taken by someone with inside knowledge of the house's layout. Perhaps she had somehow escaped the basement and been abducted from outside the house without leaving evidence of her exit. but each theory was systematically debunked by the physical evidence. The basement had been examined by structural engineers who confirmed there were no hidden passages or secret compartments. Every person with access to the house had been investigated and cleared, and the search dog's inability to track Jessica's scent beyond the basement stairs made an undetected escape seem impossible. The case went cold officially after 5 years, though it was never closed. Jessica's age-progressed photographs were distributed periodically, showing what she might look like at 10, 12, 15 years old. But as time passed, even these updates became less frequent, and Jessica Williams began to fade from public memory. By 2006, 10 years after Jessica's disappearance, David and Linda had reached a painful equilibrium. They had learned to function as a couple again, though their relationship bore permanent scars from their shared trauma. They no longer spoke of Jessica daily, but her absence colored every aspect of their lives like a shadow that could never be completely dispelled. David had been promoted to plant manager at the paper mill, partly in recognition of his dedication during the difficult years following Jessica's disappearance. Work had become his refuge, a place where he could focus on concrete problems with achievable solutions. Linda had returned to teaching after 3 years, but she transferred to the high school to avoid the painful associations with elementary-age children. She found purpose in helping teenagers navigate the challenges of adolescence, though she couldn't help wondering what challenges Jessica might have faced at each age. They established a small memorial scholarship in Jessica's name at the high school, awarded annually to a student planning to study elementary education. It was their way of honoring their daughter's memory, while contributing something positive to their community. But they never opened the basement door. In 10 years, neither David nor Linda had set foot in the space where Jessica had vanished. They used the upper floors of their house and ignored the sealed room below, as if it were a tomb they couldn't bear to visit. By 2016, 20 years after Jessica's disappearance, the Williams family had achieved a kind of peace with their loss. David was now 57, his brown hair completely gray, his face lined with the accumulated stress of 2 decades spent wondering about his daughter's fate. Linda was 53, her once vibrant red hair now kept short and streaked with silver, her green eyes holding depths of sadness that had become part of her fundamental character. They had discussed selling the house many times over the years, but somehow they could never bring themselves to leave. This was where Jessica had lived, where her memories were embedded in every room. Leaving felt like abandoning her completely, but in the spring of 2016, circumstances finally forced their hand. David suffered a mild heart attack that served as a wake-up call about their mortality and future plans. Linda was approaching retirement, and they wanted to downsize to a smaller home that would be easier to maintain. With heavy hearts, they contacted a real estate agent and began the painful process of preparing their house for sale. This meant confronting the basement for the first time in 20 years, cleaning out the accumulated storage and dealing with the space where their daughter had vanished. On a humid Saturday morning in June, David stood before the basement door with a key in his trembling hand. Linda stood beside him, her face pale but determined. Together, they had decided to face this final challenge and reclaim the lost part of their home. The deadbolt turned with difficulty, the mechanism stiff from years of disuse. The door opened with a creak of protest, revealing the basement stairs descending into darkness. The air that escaped smelled musty and stale, like a room that had been sealed for decades. David flipped the light switch and fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the basement exactly as they had left it 20 years earlier. Jessica's doll still lay on the floor where she had dropped it, now covered with a thick layer of dust. The old cassette player sat on the coffee table, its pink plastic faded but still recognizable. Walking down those stairs felt like stepping back in time. Every detail was preserved exactly as it had been on that terrible October afternoon. The wood paneling, the faded carpeting, the boxes of books and games that had once provided hours of entertainment for their missing daughter. Linda picked up Jessica's doll with reverent care, brushing away the dust and cradling it against her chest. "Hello, Susie," she whispered, using the name Jessica had given the toy. "We're finally here to take you home." David began the systematic process of cataloging the basement's contents, determining what could be donated, what should be discarded, and what they wanted to keep as mementos of their former life. Most of the furniture would stay with the house, but Jessica's personal items would come with them to their new home. It was while moving David's old workbench to access the area behind it that they made the discovery that would change everything. Hidden in the narrow space between the workbench and the basement's back wall was a small object that neither of them had ever seen before. It was a cassette recorder, similar to Jessica's but older and more sophisticated. The device was covered in dust and grime, suggesting it had been hidden there for many years. Unlike Jessica's bright pink player, this one was black and appeared to be a more expensive model designed for serious recording work. "What is that?" Linda asked, setting down a box of books to examine the mysterious recorder. David lifted the device carefully, noting its substantial weight and professional appearance. "I've never seen it before," he said slowly. "It's not ours. I have no idea how it got there." The recorder was a Sony model from the 1980s, the kind used by journalists and researchers for conducting interviews. A cassette tape was still loaded in the device, and the counter showed that the tape had been played partially through. "Should we?" Linda began, then trailed off. They both understood the implications of their discovery. This recorder had been hidden in their basement for an unknown period of time. It might contain evidence related to Jessica's disappearance. "We should call Detective Morrison," David said, though his voice betrayed his curiosity about the tape's contents. This could be important, but Linda was already reaching for the recorder's play button. "Just a few seconds," she said. "I need to know." She pressed play, and the basement filled with the sound of static. For a moment, they thought the tape might be blank or too damaged to play. But then cutting through the white noise came a voice that made both of their hearts stop. "Mommy? Daddy? Can you hear me?" It was Jessica's voice, unmistakably their daughter's, but older somehow, more mature than the 9-year-old girl they remembered. The voice continued, barely audible through the static. "I've been trying to reach you for so long. I'm okay, but I can't come home yet. There's something I need to tell you about the day I disappeared." Linda's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. David grabbed the recorder, his fingers fumbling with the controls as he tried to turn up the volume. The voice continued, fading in and out like a radio signal from a distant station. "I didn't leave the basement that day. I'm still here, but I'm somewhere else too. It's hard to explain. The man with the dark eyes, he showed me how to step between the spaces, but I got lost, and I've been trying to find my way back ever since." The tape continued for several more minutes, with Jessica's voice describing a place that sounded both familiar and impossibly strange. She spoke of walking through shadows that felt solid, of time moving differently, of watching her parents through windows that only she could see. "I see you every day," Jessica's voice whispered through the static. "I see you crying for me, and I want to come home so badly, but I don't know how. The man promised he would teach me, but he lied. He left me here alone." The recording ended abruptly, leaving David and Linda standing in stunned silence in the basement where their daughter had vanished 20 years earlier. The implications of what they had just heard were staggering and impossible to accept. "That's not possible," David said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Jessica disappeared 20 years ago. She was 9 years old. Even if she were alive somewhere, she would be 29 now, not whatever age that voice sounded." But Linda was already rewinding the tape, desperate to hear their daughter's voice again. "That was Jessica," she said with absolute certainty. "I know my daughter's voice. That was Jessica." They played the tape 3 more times, each listening revealing new details that raised more questions than answers. Jessica spoke of trying to leave messages for them, of learning to use the spaces between to communicate across impossible distances. She mentioned seeing them through the basement windows, though the basement had no windows that would allow such observation. Most disturbing of all, Jessica spoke of the recording as if it were being made recently, not 20 years after her disappearance. She mentioned seeing Linda's gray hair and David's new glasses, details that were accurate to their current appearance but couldn't have been known to a 9-year-old in 1996. "We have to call Morrison," David said, though his voice shook with the magnitude of what they were facing. "We have to report this." Detective Morrison, now retired but still living in the area, arrived at their house within an hour of David's call. The former detective was in his 70s now, his hair white and his step slower, but his mind remained sharp and his dedication to Jessica's case unwavering. Morrison listened to the tape with the same careful attention he had brought to every aspect of the original investigation. His expression grew increasingly troubled as Jessica's voice described experiences that defied rational explanation. "This is either the most elaborate hoax I've ever encountered," Morrison said slowly, "or we're dealing with something that challenges everything we understand about reality itself." "It's Jessica," Linda insisted. "I know it's Jessica. A mother knows her child's voice." Morrison didn't disagree, but his law enforcement training demanded skepticism. "The voice does sound like Jessica. aged approximately 10 years. But Linda, think about what that would mean. Jessica would have had to somehow survive for 20 years in some kind of alternate dimension, while remaining physically frozen at roughly the age she was when she disappeared. I know how it sounds, Linda replied, but I also know what I'm hearing. That's my daughter. Morrison arranged for the tape to be analyzed by audio specialists at the State Police Laboratory. Digital enhancement techniques that hadn't existed in 1996 were now available to examine the recording in detail. The results were as baffling as the tape itself. The voice pattern analysis showed characteristics consistent with Jessica Williams, aged approximately 15 to 16 years old. The recording showed no signs of digital manipulation or artificial generation. According to every technical test available, the voice on the tape was genuine, but the content of the recording remained impossible to explain through conventional means. Jessica spoke of experiences that sounded like science fiction, of moving between dimensions and observing her parents from places that shouldn't exist. The investigation was quietly reopened, though Morrison was careful to avoid media attention that might turn the case into a circus of supernatural speculation. A small team of specialists was assembled to examine every aspect of the recording and its implications for understanding Jessica's disappearance. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a physicist from the University of Michigan, was consulted about the theoretical possibility of the phenomena Jessica described. While she couldn't endorse the literal interpretation of the recording, Dr. Rodriguez noted that quantum physics had revealed aspects of reality that seemed equally impossible to common sense. There are theoretical frameworks in quantum mechanics that suggest the existence of parallel dimensions or alternate realities, Dr. Rodriguez explained. While we have no practical evidence for human consciousness existing across such boundaries, the mathematics doesn't entirely rule it out. Psychologist Dr. James Chen evaluated the possibility that the recording represented some form of elaborate psychological manipulation or mass hysteria, but his analysis of David and Linda's mental state suggested they were rational individuals processing a genuinely anomalous experience, not people suffering from delusions or psychological breakdown. As the analysis continued, more disturbing details emerged from the enhanced recording. Background sounds on the tape included voices that seemed to be speaking a language no one could identify, mechanical noises that didn't correspond to any known technology, and what sounded like wind blowing through spaces that shouldn't exist. Most unsettling of all, careful analysis revealed multiple instances where Jessica's voice seemed to be responding to questions or comments that weren't audible on the recording, as if she were having a conversation with someone present during the recording session. She's not alone wherever she is, Morrison concluded after reviewing the analysis. Someone or something is with her, but we can't hear their side of the conversation. The investigation reached a critical point when Dr. Rodriguez suggested an experiment that might provide additional evidence about the nature of Jessica's situation. If Jessica could somehow observe her parents through the basement, as her recording suggested, then it might be possible to establish some form of communication. David and Linda agreed to spend time in the basement, speaking aloud to Jessica and attempting to elicit some form of response. Morrison set up recording equipment throughout the space, hoping to capture any anomalous sounds or voices that might indicate Jessica's presence. The first several attempts yielded nothing but silence. David and Linda sat in the basement for hours, talking to empty air, feeling foolish but desperate for any connection with their missing daughter. But on the fourth attempt, something extraordinary happened. Linda was reading aloud from one of Jessica's favorite childhood books when the basement's temperature suddenly dropped by 15 degrees. The change was so dramatic that their breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. At the same time, Morrison's recording equipment began picking up electromagnetic interference unlike anything he had encountered before. The digital readouts fluctuated wildly, and speakers throughout the basement began emitting a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, cutting through the electronic chaos, came Jessica's voice again, clearer than on the original recording. "Mommy, I can see you. I can see you reading my book. I'm right here, but I'm not here. I'm in the in-between place. The man with the dark eyes. He tricked me. He said he would show me something wonderful, but he trapped me here instead." Linda reached out toward the sound of Jessica's voice, her hands grasping at empty air. "Jessica, baby, how do we bring you home? Tell us how to help you." "I don't know," Jessica's voice replied, sounding heartbreakingly young and lost. "I've been trying to find the way back for so long. Sometimes I can see through to your world, but I can't touch anything. I can't come through. The communication lasted for approximately 10 minutes before the electromagnetic interference faded and the basement returned to normal temperature. But those 10 minutes provided more information about Jessica's fate than 20 years of conventional investigation. According to Jessica's account, she had been approached in the basement by a stranger she described as the man with the dark eyes. This individual had somehow convinced her to follow him into what she called the in-between place, a realm that existed parallel to the normal world, but remained invisible to most people. He said I was special, Jessica explained during a subsequent communication session. He said only certain children could see the doorways between worlds. He promised to show me amazing things, but once I followed him, I couldn't get back. The description of Jessica's abductor was frustratingly vague. She remembered dark eyes and a voice that seemed to come from inside her head rather than through her ears. But she couldn't recall physical details like height, hair color, or clothing that might help identify the individual. More disturbing was Jessica's account of her 20 years in the in-between place. According to her description, time moved differently there. She had experienced only about 2 years of subjective time while 20 years passed in the normal world. This explained why her voice sounded like that of a teenager, rather than a 29-year-old woman. There are others here, Jessica revealed during one of their conversations. Other children who were taken like me. We try to help each other, but we're all lost. Some have been here much longer than me, from the perspective of your world. This revelation opened terrifying implications about the scope of the phenomenon. If Jessica's account was accurate, there might be dozens or hundreds of missing children trapped in this alternate dimension, taken by the mysterious figure she called the man with the dark eyes. Morrison contacted FBI specialists who dealt with serial crimes against children, sharing Jessica's account while being careful to emphasize the unusual nature of the evidence. The response was predictably skeptical, but the agents agreed to review cold cases of child disappearances that shared similar characteristics. What they found was deeply disturbing. Over the past 50 years, there had been dozens of cases across the United States involving children who had vanished from secure locations under impossible circumstances. Children who disappeared from locked rooms, from fenced yards with no exit points, from houses where parents were present and alert. Many of these cases shared common elements with Jessica's disappearance. Children who were imaginative and creative, often described as sensitive or different by their families. Children who had reported seeing or hearing things that adults couldn't perceive. Children who vanished completely, leaving no physical evidence of their departure. The pattern suggested a predator who specifically targeted children with certain psychological characteristics, someone who could somehow manipulate reality itself to access victims and transport them to an alternate dimension. But understanding the pattern didn't provide a solution for rescuing Jessica or the other trapped children. Despite weeks of experimentation with different communication techniques, no method was found to create a stable portal between the dimensions. Dr. Rodriguez consulted with theoretical physicists around the world, sharing the recorded evidence while requesting their professional opinions about the possibility of interdimensional travel. The responses ranged from fascination to skepticism, but no one could provide a practical method for breaching the barrier between worlds. Meanwhile, David and Linda continued their evening conversations with Jessica, treasuring each precious moment of contact with their daughter while agonizing over their inability to bring her home. Jessica's accounts of her experiences in the alternate dimension painted a picture of a strange but not unpleasant existence, where time moved slowly and the environment responded to the emotions and desires of its inhabitants. "It's beautiful here in some ways," Jessica told them during one conversation. "The sky changes colors based on how we're feeling, and we can make things appear just by imagining them strongly enough. But it's not real beauty, Daddy. It's like living in a dream that you can never wake up from." The trapped children had formed a kind of community, helping each other cope with their displacement and searching together for ways to return to their families. Jessica had become something of a leader among them, using the communication skills she had developed to serve as a spokesperson for the group. "We all miss our families so much," Jessica explained. "Some of the other kids have been here so long that they're starting to forget what their parents looked like. I try to help them remember, but it's hard when everything here feels more real than the memories of home." The most heartbreaking aspect of Jessica's situation was her awareness of everything she had missed in the normal world. She could observe her parents through some kind of interdimensional window, watching them age and grieve while being unable to comfort them or participate in their lives. "I saw you and Mommy at my memorial service," Jessica told David during one particularly emotional conversation. "I wanted to tell you that I was okay, that I was watching over you, but I couldn't make you hear me then. I've been trying to learn how to communicate ever since." The discovery of the hidden recorder had apparently been Jessica's breakthrough moment, her first successful attempt to create a physical record that her parents could find and understand. She had been practicing for years, learning to manipulate the electromagnetic environment of the basement to operate recording equipment. "I watched you hide that recorder behind the workbench, Daddy," Jessica revealed. "You put it there when I was 6 years old, after you recorded yourself practicing a speech for your company, but I learned how to use it to make my own recording." This revelation troubled David, who did remember hiding the recorder but had completely forgotten about it after Jessica's disappearance. The fact that Jessica had been observing their family for years before learning to communicate was both comforting and unsettling. As autumn approached, marking the 20th anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, the investigation had reached an impasse. Communication with Jessica was possible but unpredictable, dependent on environmental conditions that no one fully understood. The scientific community remained divided about whether the phenomenon was genuine or an elaborate hoax, despite the mounting evidence. More importantly, no progress had been made toward actually rescuing Jessica or the other trapped children. The alternate dimension remained inaccessible to anyone from the normal world, and Jessica's attempts to find an exit from her side had been unsuccessful. "I'm not giving up," Jessica assured her parents during their latest conversation. "The other kids and I are working together to map this place, to understand how it connects to your world. There has to be a way back. There has to be." But as winter settled over Cedar Brook and the basement grew cold and quiet once again, David and Linda faced the possibility that their daughter might remain forever lost in the space between worlds, close enough to talk to, but too far away to touch. The recorder sat on the basement table like a lifeline to their missing child, a technological bridge across an impossible distance. And somewhere in the darkness beyond perception, Jessica Williams continued her search for a way home, guided by love that transcended the boundaries of reality itself. The mystery of her disappearance had evolved into something far stranger and more complex than anyone could have imagined. But for David and Linda Williams, the most important fact remained unchanged. Their daughter was alive, she loved them, and she was trying to come home. The rest, however impossible it might seem, would have to be enough until science could catch up with the reality of their situation. In a basement in Michigan, a family separated by dimensional barriers continued to love each other across the void, proving that some connections are stronger than the laws of physics themselves.